This is Tony Verhoeven, and we are talking industrial automation with Matt Burton of Hargrove Controls and Automation. I'm sitting here with Matt right now. Hi, Matt.
How you doing, Tony?
Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate you taking some time to sit with us and help people get to know you. We're recording this here not only for YouTube. We'll have a video version of this that you're watching right now, but we'll also put this on the Talking Industrial Automation podcast. So Matt, you are a control system integrator, and I think your head office is in Mobile. Is that correct?
Yes, we're in Mobile, Alabama, and we actually have 12 offices across the southeastern United States, and one of those being in Philadelphia, which is not exactly the southeast, but those are full-service engineering offices for Hargrove. But we also provide automation systems integration services to those groups as well.
Okay, and how long has Hargrove been around?
So Hargrove was founded in 1995. Started as a full-service engineering company. Its actual first two teammates were automation, panel shop, instrument electrical design, and PLC programming. But Hargrove developed into a full-service EPC engineering company, and the automation kind of lagged. In 2012, I came to Hargrove, and we expanded the automation capability of Hargrove and formed Hargrove Controls Automation in January of 2013. Since then, the automation group has grown from originally 3 to 4 teammates. We're now just broke 100 here at the end of 2017.
Wow! Congratulations. That's great. That's great.
Yeah,
so
finally getting out of no man's land for that. Getting between that 20 and 100.
Excellent. And what do you attribute your success, I guess, in that growth in such a short time period?
So, Hargrove has developed a great reputation for engineering services. And again, it had been always performed automation, just not on the focus scale that it has been. So it had a reputation to build off of. And we quickly, with a lot of connections that I had and relationships of people that I knew in the business, we quickly were able to assemble and leverage the existing Hargrove customer base and grow the team as a focused entity.
Great. And so now you've also been involved in CSIA for a number of years as well. I think 3 or 4 years now you've been a member?
That's an interesting story for us. When I came to Hargrove, one of the things that attracted me, this was my the second startup company I've worked with in the systems integration industry. And coming here to Hargrove was big on standards, big on developing what good looks like and implementing that into their work process and having a playbook to execute by. They built the Hargrove workbook is based on CII in best practices. And we worked with CII the first few years trying to, figure out how automation really fit into that. But CII didn't really see automation as an engineering discipline. So we were, in kind of a search for a best practices and such, and met Robert Long at the ABB conference, ABB Users World. I think it was 2015 or so. And very quickly, looked at some of the demo paperwork he had on the CSIA best practices and such, and got very excited about it. That was in the spring, and we went to the first conference in Washington, D.C. It was my first CSIA conference, and immediately saw that this was the differentiator, game changer we were looking to integrate into our business. And very much after that, started working to bring the best practices in. And then, of course, we achieved CSIA certification this past year for our Mobile office.
So I always ask integrators that I've been interviewing now, what is really their interpretation, or how would they describe the best practices? You mentioned the other organizations. What does CII stand for, by the way?
It's the Construction Industry Institute.
Okay.
Just like CSIA, it's a consortium of contractors, engineering companies, manufacturers, end users, clients, and they all take off their hats that they have, and they come together as entities to contribute to the industry as a whole and say, hey, these are things that the industry needs to execute by. This is what clients expect. This is what contractors need to be providing. And they basically got together and defined what good looks like. And Hargrove has been a huge proponent of CII. Mm-hmm. You have members that sit on the board of CII, members that have written several white papers for CII. And actually, Hargrove kind of led within CII a lot of best practices on multi-office execution for engineering services, which is a big part of what we do in systems integration world too. with our
Great.
multiple office approach.
So as I was saying before, I have asked several other controls engineers what they think of the best practices and how they describe those. So knowing obviously that you have instituted or adhered to best practices even in another organization, how would you describe the best practices here at CSIA?
Well, the best practices are really just simply when I describe them to clients and such, it's a playbook. It actually, we have a system. This is our system. We use the best practices. And that's a differentiator for us because so much we hear about systems integration industry of, hey, we tried that. We're big on vendor driven solutions. So we've tried the independent integrator model and we don't get good consistency. Why is your consistency better than any other integrator? What do you do that's different? What makes you different than any other normal integrator that comes to the door? Because we're not tied with a big product. We're just, they don't know us. They don't know who we are. They haven't seen how we work. So the best practices is a document that we can put in front of them and say, look, we have a system. We have a playbook. These are the things we execute by. This is how we measure ourselves. This is how we perform quality. This is how we do factory acceptance testing. These are all the things that make a good project work. And this is a proven and tried and true standard. It's now in its fourth version, fifth version about to come out. Mm-hmm. And, it's been around for a long time, 20 years, about the same time as Hargrove. So it stood the test of time. The system has. It's been improved. And it's the same thing at CII. I end up comparing CSA to CII a lot because when you're out in the engineering world, CII is well understood by those project managers and capital leaders as saying the same thing. It's a consortium. We have vendors, we have other integrators, we have manufacturers, panel shops, everybody, developers, software developers, everybody comes together and we dispel our hats and our competitive atmosphere, but yet we sit down and talk about what does the industry need to do as a whole to be better. What does good look like? That's the simplest way to define what the best practices do is if you follow the manual, you're going to be good. And so what does good look like? What is a good integrator? How does that perform? And how do we document that?
Very good. I like that term. What does good look like? So how would you, I guess, what would you say to an integrator who's successful, right? I talk to integrators all the time that are 25 years in. And so they discover us and maybe they see that the best practices are really, and we haven't really talked about certification yet, but that's really the capstone on best practices. They see that certification is required as part of submitting a proposal to a customer. And so sometimes they're a little unsure and why do I need to get this? I'm already successful. What would you tell an integrator that, is kind of seeing this and maybe a little skeptical of the best practices and CSIA certification?
Well, I'd say there's nothing to be skeptical about it. And, what we did off immediately was look at the best practices, went through them. It was over a 2-year process for us to reach the certification goal. And when we first looked at it, the first thing we identified was, hey, here's the best practices. This is what we want to identify with, but this is what we've been looking for. And we started implementing it, started comparing it to the Hargrove management system, which, like I said earlier, was based on CII standards. Saw where the differences were, where things were, filled in the gaps. There's a lot of similarities between best practices of CII and CSIA, as a matter of fact. But there's a lot of gaps too, because CSIA is the systems integration industry and CII is engineering. So we started filling in the gaps with it. And that's really the best thing was people coming in. We learned a great term going through the CSIA, a pre-certification process called tribal knowledge. And we use that now. It's well spoken all throughout our company. When we say tribal knowledge, everybody immediately knows that, okay, this is something that we do, but it's not documented. And through our growth, especially, we talked about that a minute ago, growing from 4 to 5 people in 2012 to over 100 now and over multiple office locations. The reason tribal knowledge is so tough to deal with is that all the incumbents know it, but none of the new people do. And we added a tremendous amount of staff. And execution has been a challenge. There's no doubt about it. Everybody has mistakes in execution. Nothing's ever 100% in this world, but the strive for perfection is always there. That's how we make money as a systems integrators, is we control our expenses, control our overhead, execute a project, and try to book the margin that we plan for in the project. So if all that's in our head and we bring on teammates that don't have that knowledge, how do they get that knowledge from us? If I sit down and just talk about it, I'm going to leave a ton of things out. Our focus is going to change. It could take days, and they're going to forget things. They're going to focus on certain things that I say. It's just not all there. However, with best practices, we've developed checklists, procedures. It's a library, and it's not that you have to sit down and we make everybody read it when they first come in. But when someone comes to me and says, Matt, what do we do for this? I say, hey, we have a practice and a checklist for that. Instead of me telling you that and possibly even making a mistake myself with it, why don't you read the procedure? And here's where it is on our intranet, on our website. And that's available, across the company, anywhere. I can be anywhere in the country. I can log into our intranet page. I can get on my iPad or whatever, and I can pull up our practice for how we do a project kickoff. What does a factory acceptance test look like? What does a loop sheet check look like? What does a interlock check form look like? What's our proposal approval procedure? We have a system for everything, and it's well documented. And the best practices guided us through doing that. Now, whether certification is a goal or not, the best practices still gave us, helped guide us, help document our business. And that ends up being a custom product for everybody in the end, because everybody executes a little bit differently. That's part of everybody's competitive advantage. But at the same, it's a template that you can fill in the blanks on and customize to your business. And if you document things and everybody works to a system, then you'll work a lot better. And if you don't believe me, ask Nick Saban about systems.
I knew you were going to bring up Nick Saban. So I love your local nomenclature, tribal knowledge. Another integrator here, well known throughout the CSIA community. So his term is a loose collection of heroes. Right. And so, and it kind of speaks to the same thing of like, okay, you've got this group of people, really smart people, and maybe they've been together, and if there's a culture and there's expertise, and, you build that up over a number of years, but then if somebody leaves, where does all that institutional knowledge happen? I'm sure that happens to you guys all the time, but now you've got insurance against that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody, you bring in all the senior expertise, you develop senior expertise over time. Everybody learns, we gain experience. And the thing is to go back and revisit our procedures. We were certified in July of this year of 2017. And then we had a kind of a business restructuring due to the size of our business. Everybody's going to restructure. That's just corporate life. Every few years, you're going to have to look, you're going to have to adjust. And immediately, what was great about it was some of the people that were, in our room on our planning, on my leadership team for the restructuring said, what's this going to do to our procedures? What's this going to do to our best practice? And I said, it's going to change it, and we're going to have to modify it. And we just need to work up a plan for doing that. And, ironically, everybody started kind of almost let some air out of the room, because, everybody immediately goes to overhead and cost and those types of things. And I said, wait a second, there's some creative ways we can be efficient about updating our procedures and documents. And, so we did some brainstorming on that, and we went through it and came up with some procedures, and we ended up getting some of our newer teammates, our younger talent, to really work with the updating of that. And that really was to help ingrain them more with those best practices and how we execute, versus having them sit there and read it and sit in their office and cube and read it and test them on it, which is boring, because that's just like college all over again for them. And they've just been through 4 or 5 years of it. We engaged them, brought them into the process, had them do the work on it. They put their sweat equity into updating the procedures. And they actually all came back with a lot of, wow, now I understand why we do things a certain way. They saw a lot more of a bigger picture. And, Simon Sinek right now is on a huge campaign for, start with why. And I think that plays directly into it. We engaged some of our newer people to help update our best practices. And even though we don't have them in place for 6 months, we updated them, and they got a lot out of it and enjoyed that.
So does a client see, I guess, an improvement in working with you versus another integrator who is not certified? I mean, because how transparent is this adherence to best practices and certification in your everyday life to the client? Do they see it? Does it feel different to them? Have they told you it feels different?
I think they see it feels different from the way we communicate. We're better on our project change notices. We're better on our weekly meetings and updates with them. We're better in a more formalized fashion. And it's not real obvious at first. And, one of the feedbacks that we've gotten from a lot of clients is, we've worked a lot with so-and-so integrator, and they've been a really good integrator, but you guys are better. And it's the thing, there's a lot of great systems integrators out there. Everybody that we compete against are all top integrators. I wouldn't say that anybody that we compete against is a bad integrator. But so you're really, it becomes a competition of valedictorians and salutatorians. And it's an edge. We're all kind of edging each other. We all have certain talents and certain people that have certain expertise that's unique. And but when we look at the whole, and you're going up to somebody that's brand new that doesn't know us, again, I feel like talking about having a system for how we do things, that it's not ad hoc, that we have documentation to back that up. We can show projects. We can have them talk to other customers that say, hey, yeah, Hargrove does execute by a system. We have a systematic approach for success on our projects. And that kind of feedback is where clients really see it. They don't really, necessarily see a CSIA manual sitting in the corner and a certain type of form that they get all the time. It's more transparent than that. But in the end, as a whole, we saw a huge increase in project execution efficiency through the practices. We started the best practices implementation in 2016. Really started going through pre-audits and things like that in late 2016, working to a goal of starting in 2017 with our official audit with CSIA. And, it was about an 8 to 9 month really hard process where we really pushed to do it. And by putting a goal out there of having that certification on it, it really sped up the process. We were kind of doing it without that in mind. And we were implementing, but much on a slower pace. It was kind of, hey, we've got some time. We've got a little bit of overhead in between projects. Let's work on this procedure. And we did that for the first year. And it was slow. And so my goal was to speed up our effort and say, hey, we're never going to get this fully implemented unless we put some kind of deadline out there. So I just leveraged it and said, if we're going to put a deadline out there, let's put something really hard and fast to it and put some skin in the game, which was an investment. And that was saying, okay, let's do the CSIA certification. Let's do a pre-audit. Let's go through and down that path. So, we did that. Brian Mullen came in, did our first audit with it. And Brian has actually taught me the term tribal knowledge. And, it fit with us so much. We recognized how much we had. And from there on, we drove ourselves hard and made it in the end. And it's really changed. And last year was a transformative year for us as a go overall. Everybody here in the office has said, okay, we're doing things differently now. And there was a lot of, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? So I had to sell it to the team. And the same thing was, hey, it's a differentiator. We want to be more competitive. We want to be this. We want to be that. And we want to be better. And it's part of our Hargrove culture in general, coming from the engineering side of the business, which, has adopted best practices and a management system. So eventually it started catching on, and eventually as people started seeing better success, publishing numbers on our quarterly town hall meetings that we do internally, people started to really buy in. And, we're still having to go through the process with our remote offices, but because we're very centralized in how we execute with all our financial systems and project execution, our other offices are being forced by the way we execute in Mobile to be in our best practices model. And there's starting to be some buy-in. People are starting to say, oh, this is not as hard and not as difficult to the when you're changing your behavior. And that's what, really was a behavior change for us of the ad hoc, or everybody project managers executed things the way they had learned them. And then we said, well, we want you to fill out this form now. We want to have a documented form for a project kickoff meeting. And the documentation side of it became an issue for some of our project managers. But then then we had to go back and educate and say, okay, as project managers, it's your responsibility to get the documentation done, not to do all the documentation. And it really is a training practice for all our younger engineers to become project managers, if that's where they want to go in their career, is that they do a lot of that paperwork for the PMs, produce it for the PMs evaluate it, approve it, and then they send it out into our files, project folders and such.
Very good. Very good. So switch gears a little bit here. You had mentioned that this is your second startup, right? You took a small division or group from 4 and now you're over 100. Do you consider yourself an entrepreneur?
I kind of start to do now more. I've always kind of wanted to have that title, wanted to be that type of person early on in my career. And I spent the first 6 years of my career working for our clients on the client side of the business. And that doesn't feel very entrepreneur-like. You just get projects to do and you execute those projects and you move on. But, went to a small systems integrator in 1998, was there for 2 years. And through a management change, we started to form our own company. And in 2000, I started my first company with some partners, 3 other partners, and we grew the business very successfully. We merged with a larger engineering company in 2008. And through that process, it was a lot of fun learning how to start a business, how to go through the challenges of that. But as with any learning process, you kind of in your back of your mind say, if I had to do it over again, this is how I'd do it. If I had to do it over again, this is how I'd do it. And in 2012, having some, employment changes, going out on my own again, I, became introduced to Hargrove and came here and, became a brainstorming and an entrepreneurial thinking of, hey, how do we grow the automation business at Hargrove? How does Hargrove become a true full service engineering provider, as not only providing civil, structural, mechanical, electrical, E&I process and technical services, but also how do they unfold automation into that? Because everybody knows a plant doesn't start up without an automation system. So, that's what we say about Hargrove now, is it's a true full service engineering company because it has automation. But on the side of things, we have a lot of innovation going on here at Controls Automation. We're really starting to get into product development now, which is something we're very excited about. And these are things that I'm focusing on how we grow our business. We have a lot of great leadership people here at Controls Automation, and they're spending a lot, running a lot of the day-to-day operations, and I'm still involved with that. But the same token, it's kind of, where does our business go in 10 years? Where does the systems integration industry go in 10 years? And that's where I want to put my focus, because there's a lot of people here and companies come and go. I was just at a seminar last week, and we were talking about adaptability of companies. And out of that, 87% of the Fortune 500 companies are gone in 50 years. That's a staggering statistic when you look at that. That's through mergers, acquisitions, things like that. But some of them just fade out of business through, product obsolescence. There's some great product manufacturers that we grew up with, all of us grew up with, that are not so prevalent anymore. So, how is that adaptability put into our business? And that's one of the things I focus on for us, is bringing in adaptability. And so what does systems integration look like? And we, a big part of all the SI businesses right now is migrations. And what happens when everything's migrated? What do we do then? So those are things we kind of brainstorm on that. And so, yeah, there's a part of being an entrepreneur to being in the SI business, I think. It's a small business. I like small business because of the flexibility of it, the speed at what it operates at. I think everybody that comes here to Hargrove says to me all the time after about a month, they go, I thought it was fast where I used to work, but it is really fast here. We move at a lightning pace, it seems like. And again, that's where the best practices fold back in, is that if you're moving fast, we all have to be on the same page. We have to know what each other is doing. And communication is tougher when business is moving fast. So having that playbook, kind of knowing what the next person's doing on every task, is good to have.
Right, right. So it's obviously part of your culture then.
Yes, it is very much. That was, I talked about earlier, I said behavior, getting the best practices implemented was a kind of a behavior change for us. And behavior is culture, right? Something else I've learned this past year of defining culture is what is a culture, right? That's a belief, a shared belief of assumptions. It's kind of the basis for culture. And we talk about assumptions, that goes into what I just said. If we're moving at breakneck speed on competing and executing projects, and everybody kind of has to know what each other is doing, our playbook, that the best practices are a big part of our shared assumptions and our culture that we execute by.
Great, great. So to a client, I guess to a client listening out there, stepping back a little bit, we talked up a little bit about adaptability and maybe not being around or being different because of technology changes and culture changes and things politically. What would you tell a client who is maybe still, has maybe I guess colloquially saying ancient technology, right? They're holding on to maybe some older technology or some older equipment or something like that. And, meanwhile, things are more modern these days. There's IoT out there, which has its inherent risks, but it also has also big productivity gains and more information. What's kind of your value proposition to a client like that is maybe has still doing things because things just work?
Well, I think everybody has to realize, and I think most businesses are, that evolving is competing. And technology, this is a great question. Technology is tough. If you have a system that's in place and working, one of the hardest things that we work with on clients is, you go into a project, and early in my career in the independent systems integration business, I always tried to spend a lot of time looking for the return on investment of a systems upgrade. What is that return on investment? If a client has a process chemical company out there has does a debottlenecking project, and they're improving the amount of productivity and quality of their product, then there's a return on that investment. They can calculate that. If they produce extra X percentage of pounds of material, or if it becomes they develop % less waste, they can calculate that there's a payback. What is the payback on an automation system upgrade? And it's tough to calculate that because there's no chemistry around that. It may, batches may speed up, and we have seen typically process improvements, but there's not a set science around that, or the math has not been developed to calculate that yet. So we get into these conversations about, less downtime, better uptime, better technology, but lower cost on spare parts, all those types of things. And then the clients always, respond with, well, we can upgrade just a little bit and we'll generate our own spare parts, or we'll buy used parts on the market. That's become an industry in itself, as clearinghouses for legacy automation systems that keep plants going. And so we're competing against this concept of run to failure on everything. Hey, we'll just shut down. We'll only lose one IO card. We'll just replace that one IO card. And if it shuts something in for a few minutes, it doesn't take long. It takes an hour to go out there and replace it, and we'll be back up and running. And they'll take these little performance hits in their process to justify not spending, the larger amount of money to replace the system, the technology, the operator training, all of that. And even I went to a conference years ago. Eddie Habibi with PASS was speaking on it, and I agreed with him. He was right. He said, the most valuable time that your control system has to you is the day you uninstall it, because you've got years and years and years of engineering and knowledge and of process tuning into that automation system. So it's a huge risk to change out that automation system for something that you've customized over a 15, 20-year period, to change it out to something brand new. So what is that value? So then your question on what is that value proposition to change out that highly tuned, finely tuned piece of equipment that runs your process? And you have to look for the value in the fact that your plant is now more adaptable. It's easy. The newer systems have greater flexibility. They have lower cost. The hardware costs less than it used to. It's easier to train with. It has more data information that you can gain out of your process. So a higher tech automation system can give you better process data. We now talk about Internet of Information of Things, industrial IoT, and that's very difficult to integrate with older control systems. There are products nowadays that we can put on top of newer control systems that are more open systems based with OPC and such, that allow us to get more data and turn your legacy or turn your installed base control system into more of an IoT system to get process information and analytics back. And that's the thing, we're going through this information revolution where data is moving at the, much faster. It's analyzed much quicker than it ever was before. There are more providers of analytics than there ever have been. We can actually go outside to vendor supporters that will analyze our data for us versus the internal process engineers and groups and companies. So you're able to get more subject matter experts to provide you analytical data. But you've got to get the data out of your process automation system. And if you have a legacy system, you have a very difficult manner of transmitting that data. And you may not be capturing all the data that that could provide a more relevant solution for you in the future. As far as, pump analysis, do I put a drive here instead of a control valve? What's the payback on those types of performance analytics? And so a newer control system will provide that. Again, greater flexibility, greater operator training, being the capability of having offline development training systems for training operators, bringing operators up to speed faster with the newer technology. Everything's Windows-based. Everything's more centric than it used to be with, the original control systems of the world, the early Provoxes, the TDCs, the RS3s, the Foxborough IAs of the systems. They were very, very different in how they operated. Their user interfaces were very different. And if you had those different systems at different plants and operators had to move between them, they had a hard time adjusting to how to acknowledge alarms, how to change set points, those types, and start batches, stop batches, those types of things. Now we've got these Windows-based systems. Things are very similar. The operator technology is not that different between them. And that's probably changing because of the information advancement that vendors are putting into their systems. But at the same token, you can do more with the training side of that than you could in the past at a lower cost. Virtualization is changing how things work. And these are things that have an aggregate effect on your overall process operations that are hard to quantify, but you are spending money on the older system. I actually worked on a calculation once where it showed the maintaining of older systems in compliance with new systems, and having multiple control systems in a plant was increased cost due to increased amount of training, the legacy support, the lack of the obsolescence of software being developed for the older systems. That type of product and technical support was getting harder and harder. The people available to support the older systems, there was a cost to that. And we used to work with that with clients on trying to say, well, what do you think this is? But there was a kind of a model there that it didn't show an ROI, but it showed that your expenses are going to increase over time. And over a 5-year period, your expenses are going to increase at such a rate higher than with a newer, more modern system, that you're going to start getting an ROI out of that savings. So it's not a cut and dry calculation. There's some subjective input into it, but it's something that we can work with clients on, that they can put their input into it of what they believe those costs are, And then we can help them quantify the difference between staying with a legacy platform and moving with a newer platform.
Very good. Yeah, it's probably a little bit of uncomfortable feeling of like you're expecting me the subjective word, right? I speak, I've worked for engineers, I've worked with engineers, and I know sometimes it's that hard, cold data, the ROI that you really can only trust. That's the only thing you can trust sometimes. So that field, this isn't always enough.
And it's tough too, because, the ROI is sped up. It used to be, I remember very early on in my career, it seemed like 5-year ROI was great. Everybody seemed like, if I can get my payback in 5 years in this project, that'd be great. Now clients, with the stock market moving faster and, showing value on returns on, with value growth of the stocks being so much more sped up with our high-speed data industry, it's 18 months at the long set. Everybody wants to get something in place and having a very quick payback on it. Otherwise, if it's too long of a payback, then you may miss an economic cycle, and it's not, that's too much risk to do that project. So very much of seeing, the ROI cycle of the calendar for an ROI the span of an ROI calculation to be much shorter than it used to be. And it's just the nature of our economy. Everything is a shorter life cycle than it used to be.
Very good. So let's back up even further. Matt, where were you born? Where did you go to school? Are you from Alabama, or where did you?
Oh yeah, I'm actually from Mobile, Alabama. I was grew up and raised here, but I did spend 8 years of my life outside of here. After high school, I moved to Louisville, Kentucky. Went to the University of Louisville, got my bachelor's in electrical engineering there, and went to work for my co-op company in Louisville. And so, with my co-ops and part-time work during college, and a few years after, I spent 5.5 years at Louisville Gas and Electric, and then had an opportunity to move to Nashville, worked for a Sony there for 2 years, and then got to move back to Mobile and went for a chemical company in Mobile for 2 years before entering into the contract side of the business. That totals my 6 years of career work there. Then Alabama, and then I got my professional engineering license in 2002 in Alabama, and still, continuous improvement and change has always been a part of me, education, that sort of thing. And I'll actually be finishing my master's in business this year. So
congrats.
Going on, just moving on. But I've been around the country and love to travel. And Mobile's a great place. It's a kind of a unique part of the country for sure. Interesting being here.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and the food's great. I've been there only once here, so a great, beautiful area. Gulf Shores are awesome.
We're kind of like the small town New Orleans style. We have a lot of the New Orleans influence. We have a lot of different cultural influences into what you eat here in Mobile. So, we have our own homegrown developed seafood industry, yet we also have a lot of the Creole type New Orleans style cooking that's influenced over this way. And then we get a lot of different ways their foods are cooked in different areas of the country kind of come here. So Mobile is a unique place. We're about to start Mardi Gras, and and just so everybody knows, Mardi Gras was started in Mobile. It did not start in New Orleans.
I learned something today. Excellent.
It's all fun and games, and it's funny. I go down to New Orleans quite often, and everybody in New Orleans, when I tell them I'm from Mobile, and they go, "Oh, yes, we know Mardi Gras started in Mobile."
So how did you, so you got your professional engineering license, you said you got your EE, right? How did you start to get towards factory and like process automation? How did that controls engineering start to come into play?
Yeah, that's a neat story. When I was at Louisville in engineering, I remember my group of students that all my cohorts that we studied together, we were in the library one day, and we were interviewing for our first co-op jobs. That was the beauty of University of Louisville. It has a mandatory co-op program. It's ingrained in the curriculum. You can't graduate without co-oping.
And what is a co-op? I'm not familiar with that.
A co-op is is where engineering students can go out and gain real work experience. So after your sophomore year at Louisville, you're required to go out and work for a semester, and you'll do 3 semesters. So you end up with 12 months of full experience. And it becomes an alternating program where we go work for a semester, come back to school for a semester, go out for another, come back. It rotates, and then you come back and you finish your senior year. And by that time, and then also Louisville has an expanded program where you can stay for another year and pick up your master's of engineering as well. So we were all, finished our sophomore year, and the school has, great reputation with lots of different companies that come in looking for these co-op students. And we were talking about our co-ops and what careers and what opportunities we may get into. And I interviewed pulp and paper, energy companies and such, and ended up going to work, for an energy company. And some of the others were interviewing for systems integrators at the time, and I really didn't know what a systems integrator was. And he talked to one of the guys in my group had already gotten an offer, and he was going to go build panels. That was what he was going to do on his co-op, was build panels. And so we were talking about what the controls industry was, and we all said, hey, that sounds pretty cool. This was in the early 90s, and computers were really starting to become something, and robotics were starting to show up. And being that we were double E's, technology seemed to be really interesting to us. And I thought, yeah, I'd really love to get in that controls industry, but I really didn't know how and how to get into it. And none of the companies I interviewed with were doing much with controls. At least I didn't think so. But after I went to work for Louisville Gas and Electric full-time, I got into the systems engineering side. I did a lot of network systems and things like that. And during the Bush Clean Air Act implementation of 1993, there were a lot of data collection started going on, and some of my first projects were with data historians back then. And so I started getting the controls that way through an IT background and data historian role. And that kind of continued with me moving back to Mobile and the chemical company I worked for. We got into data historian projects and systems engineering. And then as there seemed to be a revolution in the systems integration industry where the legacy systems started going to Ethernet and TCP/IP, and routers and networking started to become a big deal. And that was one of my specialties. And I had that with a process background. So that was where I got recruited into the systems integration business, was for my IT background. And then that expanded, and I got to work with the integration company I worked for was kind of split between half chemical engineers and half electrical engineers. And I brought in all this IT experience to it. And that's how I got into the systems integration industry. And that's, pretty much what we are today. We're a very balanced company. We have a lot of about half chemical engineers, half electrical engineers, some computer engineers. We do a lot of IT work. We've definitely not left my IT background behind. Cybersecurity, auditing, that's all part of our total portfolio of systems integration services today.
Yeah, I was going to say that, a lot of times I ask integrators, did they choose control system automation, or did it choose them? It sounds like it chose you. It kind of fell into it, right?
It did. I think I always kept my eyes open and looked for that opportunity. And was definitely very interested in controls, working in the process industry, for chemical manufacturer. And so, when the integrator opportunity came up, that really intrigued me back then, because, I did realize that getting on the outside, being on the contract side of the business, would expose me to a lot more, a variety of systems, a variety of plants, a variety of technologies to work in. And if you're going to learn something, immersing yourself into a high-speed type of deal, high-speed change is a way to catch up into that industry. So it was a good learning opportunity. And then it turned into, opportunities for entrepreneurship and everything else. And so I've had an exciting career. I don't regret anything that I've done with it. And I want to keep moving it forward,
Absolutely. Well, so as we're kind of winding down here, what are some of the things that you're seeing in industrial automation and control systems that are really super exciting right now? What trends are you seeing, and what gets you out of the bed? What gets you out of bed every morning of like, I can't wait to get to work to move towards this?
Yeah, well, it's the change. It's kind of going out and finding out what's going to pop in my mailbox on on a social media side of what new technology is popping out today. There's so many new technologies I see every year, and the pace at what this new technology is coming out is exciting. And I really feel like, systems integrators are we're in an extremely fast evolving industry. I kind of alluded to that earlier. Right now we're doing lots of migration work, but that's not always going to be the case. To me, these automation systems are becoming more software based. They're becoming more dispersed with Internet of Things type technology implementing in, and it's changing extremely fast. The type of project structures are going to be different. The way our clients embrace technology is going to change, and we're going to have to adapt with that. So it's always the learning. The learning is what inspires me. That's what keeps me going, is doing something new. I get bored and tire of the same old thing pretty quick. And so the challenge to always learn new things is what's interesting. And I get to go in this business, I get to go learn about something. We get to play with it, implement it, see how it works. And then we get to go bring that value to clients, and they need to go see it in place. And, it's been interesting to go back to clients and replace systems that I put in years ago when I was just a staff engineer. And I think that's intriguing, because when I put that stuff in, I thought it was pretty cool stuff then. And now I'm back putting in even more cool stuff now. And it does make you feel a little old to replace a system that you put in 10 or 15 years ago. But at the same token, you don't focus on that. That's a distraction. Focus on the value that we're providing, and then, overcoming that new challenge of implementing the new technology and making it work for the customer.
So speaking of kind of like maybe older technology or things like that, maybe when you were even a student or a young man, not younger engineer, still a young man, of course, but talking about, I guess, good skilled engineers kind of coming up these days. It's usually, it's really no secret that there's definitely a vacuum of engineers, or a lack of engineers kind of coming up. For an engineer fresh out of school, or maybe a high schooler thinking about a vocation of something of this area, what would you tell them, and how would you tell them to prepare for a career in engineering and even in control systems?
Well, obviously, engineering is a highly mathematical and science intensive STEM, related educational background field. And the biggest thing, it seems like, is encouraging engineering students or prospective engineering students is to make sure you find a way to do internships and co-ops. This is a huge thing for us. We have a very highly integrated co-op program here at Hargrove. We recruit very heavily out of our co-op program. We use it as a training program for us, and it's been been very successful. But before we had that in place, when we were smaller and we didn't have the capacity to bring on a lot of co-ops, we interviewed a lot of engineers right out of school. And what happens is those engineers that are seniors are having to compete for jobs, right? And there's a lot of jobs out there, but there's always the job you want rather than one that's what's left over. And the best students are going to be the most competitive students that we see are the ones who do co-ops. There's getting that work experience is more than just getting technical work experience. It's getting the business acumen. There's a level of the social professionalism experience that you gain from going on those co-ops. And the interview process is so much different when we bring in engineers that don't do co-ops versus ones that have done that, spent that extra year of school doing a co-op. And we've met some good engineers that didn't do co-ops that we wanted to bring on. And in the process of trying to bring them on, we'd run across another engineer that had co-op experience that was a better fit. And, that's what we have to make as employers. We have to make decisions all on fit. And we may like somebody a lot, but if you've got somebody that's got all those same qualities plus that extra year of work experience, you have to do what's best for the business. There's owners, there's my supervisors, there's CEO of Hargrove, Ralph Hargrove himself. We've got to do and investors, associates here at Hargrove that, own part of the business. And we've got to do what's best for the business overall. And we're always bringing the best talent. And so to prepare yourself to compete, engineers, it's gotten to be more prevalent. More schools are doing co-op programs today than when I went to school. I did a college campus tour my junior year of high school, and all I did was ask about engineering programs. I knew very early on that I wanted to be, going to engineering, and didn't know which engineering, but I wanted to be engineering. And I kept, my mom is from Louisville, and she was very big on the University of Louisville because of the co-op program. She had worked at GE in Louisville, and that was something she was familiar with and thought that was a great deal. And I always dispelled it, and it was like, okay, that's Mom telling me this stuff. But thank goodness for that insight that she gave me, because, my co-op program really set me up to start my career. And, I was able to use it as a part-time experience. And when I graduated school, I had a leg up on students with master's degrees all the way around, and it really paid off. And it worked so well for all the people that we hire too. Our co-op students that come in as full-time engineers, they accelerate a year ahead of everybody else. Their careers accelerate faster. Your brain is in a learning training mode at that time. And when you go on these co-ops, you absorb so much so fast. And, as you start to work in your professional career, that learning side of you becomes less exercised. And, as it is with anybody, as you get older, it becomes harder to learn all the time, which is why, continuous learning is always good to have, so you don't lose that skill to learn. That's a skill in itself, learning. But the co-op is valuable. You've got to focus on that. And it really doesn't matter what engineering program you go into or anything else, but getting that co-op experience can talk volumes over everything.
That's great advice. I think definitely that should be adhered to. And I think if there's any students listening to this or watching this, I think that's really good advice. So appreciate that. Matt, I really appreciate the time that you've taken to sit down with me and kind of dig in a little bit. Hopefully it was fun for you. I really appreciate the time. Any kind of parting words or anything to say as we close this up?
Not too much, Tony. It's always great talking with you. Love talking with you. And just like to say that I look forward to seeing you in San Francisco this year at the CSIA 2018 conference. So I'll be
conference. Yeah, the conference is CSIAexecutiveconference.org, April 24th through the 27th in San Francisco. So looking forward to seeing you and anybody else. Maybe I don't know if Karen is coming, but looking forward to.
We're actually looking at a pretty good contingent this year. Probably, so we had 3 last year, which is the largest we'd sent, but we'll probably have more than that this year. I think it's becoming where, but now that we're certified and we're rolling out the best practices everywhere, more of my remote leaders are all saying, okay, we've got to get more involved themselves with it. So we expect to really have a good group come out this year.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to seeing you then, and I appreciate your time. This is Tony Verhoeven talking industrial automation with Matt Burton of Hargrove Controls and Automation.